The distant sound of thunder rolled across the prairie as Virginia Nash knelt in the red dust of the Wyoming Territory, her tears mixing with the first raindrops that fell from the darkening sky. The small wooden cross before her was crude but sturdy, just like her brother had been. Thomas Nash, gone at 24, leaving his 19-year-old sister alone in the vast, unforgiving wilderness they had dared to call home. Virginia's slender fingers traced the letters she had carefully carved into the wood. ETN, 1842, 1866. 4 years they had survived together after their parents succumbed to fever, building a modest homestead miles from the nearest town. Now, 3 days after burying him, the reality of her solitude crashed down upon her with the force of the approaching storm. "I cannot do this without you, Tommy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I do not know how." Her dark hair, usually neatly pinned, fell in loose waves around her tear-streaked face. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over the growing wind, didn't notice the tall figure dismounting from a dust-covered stallion until his shadow fell across the grave. "Madam, you shouldn't be out here with this storm coming." The voice was deep and gentle, with the slight drawl of someone who'd spent years under the western sun. Virginia startled, instinctively reaching for the small knife she kept hidden in the folds of her skirt. She turned, looking up through tear-blurred eyes at a man whose face was partially shadowed by the brim of a worn leather hat. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, a gun belt slung low on his hips, speaking of a man accustomed to the dangers of the territory. "This is private property," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "and my grief is my own business." The stranger didn't move closer, keeping a respectful distance. "Didn't mean to intrude, madam. Ethan Lockhart's my name. I was riding through when I spotted smoke from your chimney. Thought I'd check if everything was all right before this storm hits. Then I saw you out here." Another roll of thunder, closer now, punctuated his words. Fat raindrops began to fall more steadily, darkening spots on his tan duster. Virginia struggled to her feet, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she appeared. "I was just saying goodbye to my brother, again, though it never seems to take." Ethan's eyes moved to the fresh grave, understanding dawning on his weathered features. He removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. He looked to be in his late 20s, with eyes the color of a summer sky and hair the shade of sun-bleached wheat. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, Miss Nash, Virginia Nash." She brushed dirt from her skirt, avoiding his gaze. "And your condolences, while appreciated, don't change anything. Thomas is gone, and I'm alone." The admission seemed to hang in the air between them as the rain began to fall in earnest. Ethan glanced at the darkening sky, then back to the young woman standing defiantly beside her brother's grave. "Miss Nash, I don't mean to press, but this storm's fixing to be a bad one. If you've got shelter nearby, you should head there now." Virginia nodded reluctantly. "The cabin's just beyond those trees." She cast one last look at the grave. "I suppose Tommy wouldn't want me catching pneumonia on his account." As they walked toward the cabin, Ethan leading his horse, Virginia felt the weight of her grief pressing down on her shoulders. She had spent 3 days alternating between weeping and working herself to exhaustion, trying to maintain the homestead, as Thomas would have wanted. But the truth was, without him, she didn't know if she could survive the coming winter alone. The cabin came into view small but solid, with a thin wisp of smoke still curling from the stone chimney. A modest barn stood nearby, and a few chickens pecked around the yard, unconcerned by the approaching storm. "You've been maintaining this place by yourself?" Ethan asked, genuine admiration in his voice. "Since Thomas—" Virginia swallowed hard. "Yes, though I'm not sure for how much longer." Inside, the cabin was neat but sparse. A small table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a narrow bed in one corner, and another behind a simple partition. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a shelf held a few precious books. Virginia moved automatically, stirring the embers in the stove and adding kindling. "You can wait out the worst of the storm here, Mr. Lockhart. I can offer you coffee at least." Ethan removed his hat and coat, hanging them on a peg near the door. "That's kind of you, Miss Nash. I won't impose longer than necessary." As Virginia busied herself with the coffee, Ethan noticed the strain in her movements, the way her hands trembled slightly. Outside, the rain began to lash against the windows, and thunder cracked overhead. "Your brother," Ethan said carefully. "Was he ill?" Virginia's movements stilled. "Rustlers," she said, the word sharp with bitterness. "3 of them came for our horses. Thomas confronted them. They shot him and took the horses anyway." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I found him in the barn. He lived long enough to tell me not to come after them." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, Miss Nash. It's a hard way to lose someone." "Every way is hard," she replied, pouring the coffee into 2 mismatched cups. "The marshal from Willow Creek came, took down what I knew, which wasn't much, said he'd keep an eye out, but—" She shrugged, the gesture conveying her lack of hope for justice. They sat in silence as the storm raged outside. Virginia found herself studying her unexpected guest. Despite his trail-worn appearance, there was something gentle about Ethan Lockhart. His eyes held a kindness that seemed at odds with the hard life, evidenced by the calluses on his hands and the weather lines at the corners of his eyes. "You're not just passing through, are you, Mr. Lockhart?" she asked suddenly. Ethan looked up from his coffee, surprised by her directness. "What makes you say that, Miss Nash? You're too interested in my troubles for a man just seeking shelter from a storm." A small smile touched his lips. "Perceptive. I've been tracking a group of horse thieves for about 2 weeks. 3 men matching the description you'd give of your brother's killers hit several homesteads between here and the Colorado border." Virginia set her cup down with enough force to slosh coffee onto the table. "You're a lawman." "Not officially. I work for the Pinkerton Agency sometimes, but this is personal. They stole from a friend of mine about a month back, killed his son, too." Ethan's eyes darkened. "I've been on their trail since then." "And now you've found their latest victims," Virginia said bitterly. "I'm sorry I didn't catch up to them sooner," Ethan replied, genuine regret in his voice. "But I mean to see them brought to justice, Miss Nash. For your brother and for the others they've hurt." Virginia studied him, searching for deceit and finding none. "Even if you catch them, it won't bring Thomas back." "No, madam, it won't. Nothing can do that." The simple acknowledgement of this truth, the first time anyone had said it so plainly to her, broke something in Virginia. The tears she had been holding back spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ethan hesitated, then moved to sit beside her. He didn't touch her, just offered his presence as she wept. "He was all I had," she finally managed between sobs. "Our parents died 4 years ago, and it's been just the 2 of us, building this place, making it work. What am I supposed to do now? How do I keep going?" When she finally looked up, she found Ethan watching her with a compassion that only made her tears flow faster. He reached into his pocket and offered her a clean handkerchief. "I know it doesn't help much now, but I lost my younger brother in the war," he said quietly. "Some days the pain is still fresh, even 5 years on." Virginia accepted the handkerchief, wiping her eyes. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "Not completely, but it changes, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Miss Nash, I don't presume to know what your brother would want, but I imagine he'd want you to live, not just survive, but truly live." The storm continued through the afternoon, giving them no choice but to remain in the cabin together. Virginia found herself sharing stories about Thomas, his infectious laugh, his stubbornness, his dreams for their homestead. Ethan listened attentively, offering his own memories of his brother when appropriate, creating a strange bond of shared grief between them. As evening approached, Virginia realized she hadn't thought about the practical matters of the homestead all day. "The animals," she said suddenly, rising to her feet. "They need tending." "I'll help," Ethan offered immediately. "The rain's let up some." Together they ventured out to the small barn. Virginia milked the cow, while Ethan fed the remaining horses a mare and a young colt that the rustlers had apparently deemed not worth taking. He worked efficiently, showing the practiced ease of someone who had spent his life around animals. "You've done this before," Virginia observed. "Grew up on a ranch in Texas," he confirmed. "Smallest of 5 brothers, so I got all the jobs nobody else wanted." "Yet you didn't stay there." Ethan shook his head. "After the war, going back didn't feel right. Too many ghosts." He patted the mare's neck gently. "Been drifting since, taking jobs here and there. The tracking work suits me, gives me purpose." When they returned to the cabin, soaked despite the brief respite in the rain, Virginia insisted on cooking a proper meal. It was the first time since Thomas's death that she'd felt the desire to do more than just survive the day. As they ate the simple stew, Ethan asked, "What will you do now, Miss Nash?" Virginia pushed a piece of potato around her bowl. "I don't know. I can't maintain this place alone, not through a Wyoming winter. I could sell, go back east to distant cousins I barely remember, but—" She looked around the cabin, at the home she and Thomas had built together. "This is all I have left of him, of us." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's a hard choice. No rush to make it tonight, though." When it came time to sleep, Virginia insisted Ethan take Thomas's bed behind the partition. She lay awake long into the night, listening to the rain against the roof and the occasional creak of the bed as her unexpected guest shifted in his sleep. For the first time since Thomas died, she didn't feel completely alone. It was a dangerous comfort. She knew Ethan Lockhart would ride out as soon as the weather cleared, continuing his pursuit of the men who had taken her brother's life. But for tonight at least, there was someone else breathing in the quiet darkness of the cabin. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Virginia woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the cabin. For a disorienting moment, she thought Thomas was alive again, that the nightmare of the past week had been just that. A nightmare. Reality crashed back as she opened her eyes to see Ethan standing at the stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. He had found her small store of eggs and bacon and was cooking with the focused attention of someone accustomed to fending for himself. "You didn't have to do that," she said, sitting up and quickly smoothing her hair. Ethan turned, a small smile warming his features. "Figured it was the least I could do for your hospitality. Hope you don't mind me raiding your pantry." "Not at all." Virginia rose, adjusting her rumpled dress and feeling suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She hadn't given much thought to how she looked since Thomas died, but now, in the presence of this kind stranger, she was acutely aware of her unwashed hair and the dark circles she knew must be under her eyes. They ate breakfast together, the conversation easier than it had been the previous day. Ethan asked about the homestead, how long she and Thomas had been there, what they grew, how they had managed. Virginia found herself explaining their routines, the careful planning they did each season, the dreams they had for expanding. "Thomas wanted to build a proper house eventually," she said, gesturing around the cabin. "This was always meant to be temporary. He drew up plans for something grander, 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen." "He sounds like he was a man of vision," Ethan commented. "He was." Virginia smiled sadly. Always looking ahead, seeing what could be instead of just what was. After breakfast, Ethan insisted on helping with the morning chores. They worked side by side, feeding animals, gathering eggs, and checking the small garden patch that had thankfully survived the storm relatively intact. As they worked, Virginia found herself watching Ethan, the confident way he moved, the gentle handling of the animals, the strength in his shoulders as he lifted a heavy water bucket. He was handsome in an understated way, with a quiet dignity that reminded her of her father. "I should be moving on," Ethan said as they finished the chores. "Those men have at least a week's head start on me now." Virginia felt a pang of disappointment that surprised her with its intensity. "Yes, of course. You have your pursuit to continue." Ethan hesitated, seeming reluctant to leave despite his words. "Miss Nash, Virginia, I'm concerned about you being here alone." I've been alone for 3 days already, she pointed out, though the thought of returning to that solitude made her heart sink. And how has that been working out? He asked gently. Virginia looked away, unable to meet his knowing gaze. I will manage. I don't doubt that. You're clearly capable. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. But there's managing, and then there's living. Your brother wouldn't want you just managing. The mention of what Thomas would want brought fresh tears to Virginia's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. You didn't know my brother, Mr. Lockhart. No, I didn't, he acknowledged. But I know what I'd want for someone I loved if I were gone, and it wouldn't be for them to suffer alone. Virginia looked up at him then, struck by the sincerity in his blue eyes. What exactly are you suggesting? Ethan took a deep breath, as if coming to a decision. I found you crying over your lost brother. I can't replace him, wouldn't try to, but I'd like to help if you'll let me. I'll be the brother he'd want you to have, at least until you decide what comes next for you. Virginia stared at him, momentarily speechless. You're offering to… what? Stay here? Help me run the homestead? You don't even know me. I'm offering to help you get through the immediate future, Ethan clarified. Those men need to be brought to justice, but they've had a significant head start. A few more days won't make much difference. I can help you get this place in order, maybe repair anything that needs fixing, make sure you're set up to either stay through winter or sell, whichever you decide. Why would you do that for a stranger? Ethan's expression softened. Because someone did the same for me once when I was at my lowest. And because it's the right thing to do. Virginia considered his offer, torn between pride and practicality. The truth was, she desperately needed help. The thought of facing each day alone, of handling all the tasks that she and Thomas had shared, was overwhelming. And there was something about Ethan Lockhart that inspired trust, despite their brief acquaintance. A week, she finally said. I'll accept your help for a week, and then you continue your hunt, and I'll have decided what comes next. Relief washed over Ethan's features. A week it is then, and I promise I'll respect whatever decision you make about your future. The next day established a pattern that would continue throughout the week. They rose early, shared breakfast, and then tackled the work that needed doing around the homestead. Ethan proved to be skilled with tools, fixing the loose boards on the porch, reinforcing the chicken coop, and patching a leak in the barn roof that had troubled Thomas for months. Virginia found herself watching him work, admiring not just his physical capabilities, but the thoughtful way he approached each task, often improving on the original construction. His hands, strong but gentle, moved with the confidence of someone who understood the materials he worked with. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Virginia shared more stories about Thomas, finding that speaking of him eased the ache in her heart rather than sharpening it. Ethan, in turn, told her about his life growing up on the Texas ranch, fighting in the war, and his years since as a drifter and sometimes Pinkerton agent. You never settled anywhere? Virginia asked on the third night as they sat drinking coffee after dinner. Ethan stared into the fire, his expression distant. Never found a place that felt right, or maybe I never let myself look too hard. After losing my brother, and then my parents, not long after, roots seemed like something that would just cause pain when they were inevitably torn up. Yet you understand why I'm reluctant to leave here, Virginia observed. Ethan nodded. Understanding something doesn't mean it's right for everyone, or even for me, necessarily. As the days passed, Virginia became increasingly aware of Ethan, not as a temporary helper or a substitute brother, but as a man one whose presence in the cabin filled spaces she hadn't known were empty. She found herself lingering over small touches as they passed tools or dishes to each other, noticing the way the corner of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his voice deepened when he was tired in the evenings. For his part, Ethan maintained a respectful distance, never overstepping the boundaries of the arrangement they had agreed upon. But Virginia sometimes caught him watching her with an expression that made her heartbeat quicken. A look of admiration, mixed with something warmer, something that both frightened and excited her. On the 5th day, they rode out together to check the fences along the property line. It was the farthest Virginia had ventured from the cabin since Thomas's death, and the open expanse of the prairie, dotted with wildflowers after the recent rain, brought a sense of freedom she had almost forgotten. "It's beautiful land you have here," Ethan commented as they paused on a rise overlooking a small creek that marked the eastern boundary of the Nash property. "It is," Virginia agreed, taking in the rolling hills, the distant mountains that caught the afternoon sunlight. Thomas had an eye for possibility. Everyone else passed this valley by, said it was too far from town, too difficult to farm, but he saw what it could become. And he was right. Virginia smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in days. He usually was the stubborn fool. They dismounted to let the horses drink from the creek. Virginia watched as Ethan knelt beside the water, splashing some on his face to cool off from the afternoon heat. Water droplets clung to his eyelashes and the stubble on his jaw, catching the sunlight. "You've been a godsend this week," she said suddenly. "I don't know how to thank you." Ethan straightened, wiping his face with his sleeve. "No thanks needed, Virginia. I've enjoyed the work and the company." Something in the way he said her name, so different from the formal Miss Nash he had started with, made her breath catch. They stood looking at each other across the small space between them, the babble of the creek and the soft nickering of the horses, the only sounds breaking the silence. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken words and growing awareness. Then Ethan cleared his throat and turned back to his horse, checking the cinch on his saddle with unnecessary thoroughness. "We should head back," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Still have that loose board in the barn to fix before sunset." The ride back to the cabin was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Virginia found herself contemplating the approaching end of their arrangement. In 2 days, Ethan would leave to continue his pursuit of the men who had killed Thomas. And she would be alone again, or would have to make the difficult decision to leave the homestead behind. Neither option appealed to her. In less than a week, Ethan Lockhart had become essential to her days in a way she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the physical help he provided, though that was significant. It was his quiet strength, his thoughtful advice, the way he listened when she spoke of her fears and hopes, the way he made her feel seen, not just as a grieving sister or a woman alone, but as Virginia, a person of value in her own right. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Virginia made a decision. "I want to go with you," she said abruptly. Ethan turned to her, surprise evident on his features. "Go with me? To track the men who killed your brother?" Virginia nodded, determination hardening within her. "Yes. They took Thomas from me. I deserve to see justice done. And afterward, I'll decide what to do about this place." "Virginia, tracking those men could be dangerous, and it's rough living on the trail, nothing like what you're used to." "Do you think I'm some delicate flower who can't handle hardship?" Virginia challenged. "I've been surviving in this territory for 4 years, Mr. Lockhart. I can ride as well as any man, shoot straight enough to hunt our food, and I'm not afraid of discomfort." Ethan studied her face, seeing the resolve in her eyes. "No, I don't think you're delicate. But this isn't just about physical hardship. These men are killers. They wouldn't hesitate to hurt you if they had the chance." "All the more reason for me not to be left alone here, wouldn't you say?" Virginia countered. "What if they decide to come back, finish what they started?" "I'd be defenseless." Ethan frowned, clearly troubled by this possibility he hadn't considered. "I hadn't thought they might return. You're right that it could be a risk." "Then it's settled. I'm coming with you." "Virginia," Ethan said, his voice gentling, "I understand wanting justice for Thomas, but vengeance is a consuming thing. It can change a person, and not for the better." "I'm not seeking vengeance," Virginia insisted, though even to her own ears the distinction sounded thin. "I want justice, and I want—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "I want to know that I did everything I could for my brother, that I didn't just hide away while his killers went free." Ethan was silent for a long moment, the fading light casting shadows across his thoughtful face. Finally, he nodded. All right. But we do this my way. You follow my lead. No risks, no heroics. If we find them, we alert the nearest law and let them handle the arrest. Agreed. Agreed. Virginia felt a weight lift from her shoulders, replaced by a nervous anticipation. This wasn't what Thomas would have wanted for her. He would have insisted she stay safe. But Thomas was gone, and she needed to find her own way now. The next day was spent preparing for their journey. They packed provisions, ammunition, and basic necessities. Virginia wrote a letter to the marshal in Willow Creek, explaining her temporary absence from the homestead and requesting occasional patrols. They arranged for a neighbor 2 miles down the valley to care for the animals while they were gone. As they worked, Virginia found herself watching Ethan more intently than ever, noticing the methodical way he packed his saddlebags, the precise checking of his weapons, the careful planning of their route. He was a man who left little to chance, who understood the dangers they might face and prepared accordingly. "Have you done this often?" she asked as he showed her how to secure her bedroll to her saddle. "Tracked men like these?" "Too often," Ethan replied grimly. "Men who think they can take what they want because they're strong enough or cruel enough to do so. The West breeds them like flies." "And you've caught many?" A shadow passed over his face. "Some. Not all. The territory's vast, and a man who knows what he's doing can disappear into it like smoke." "But you think we can find these men?" Ethan nodded. "They've been moving in a pattern, hitting isolated homesteads every few days, working their way north. If they've maintained that pattern, I have a good idea of where they might strike next." The certainty in his voice reassured Virginia. That night, their last in the cabin before setting out, she found herself unable to sleep. The decision to leave, to actively pursue the men who had killed Thomas rather than passively grieve, had awakened something in her that had been dormant since his death, a fierce determination that both frightened and empowered her. She rose from her bed and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit yard, the shadow of the barn, the familiar shape of the chicken coop, the garden Thomas had laid out with such care, all of it precious to her, yet somehow less binding than it had been a week ago. A floorboard creaked behind her, and she turned to find Ethan standing there, wearing only his trousers, his chest bare in the dim light filtering through the window. His hair was tousled from sleep, his expression concerned. "Everything all right?" he asked softly. Virginia nodded, suddenly acutely aware of his state of undress in her own thin nightgown. "Just thinking about tomorrow, about leaving this place." Ethan moved closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "Having second thoughts?" "No," Virginia said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "No, I know this is what I need to do. It's just strange to think of being away from here. This cabin has been my whole world for so long." "The world's a big place," Ethan said quietly. "Beautiful and terrible all at once. There's more out there than you can imagine." Virginia looked up at him, at the gentle understanding in his eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Will you show me? Not just the terrible parts, but the beautiful ones too?" Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a softening that made her heart beat faster. "If that's what you want, Virginia, I'll show you everything I can." The moment hung between them, heavy with possibility. Virginia became aware of how close they stood, of the warmth radiating from his skin, of the way the moonlight silvered the contours of his chest. She swayed slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Ethan's breath caught audibly. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Long day tomorrow?" Virginia nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Ethan backed away, returning to the partition that separated his sleeping area from hers. But the air between them remained charged, as if something fundamental had changed in their relationship, something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. They set out at dawn the next morning, Virginia taking one last look at the homestead as they crested the rise that would soon hide it from view. The cabin looked small and vulnerable in the early light, a fragile human endeavor in the vastness of the prairie. "We'll come back," Ethan said, reading her thoughts, "when this is finished." Virginia nodded, then urged her mare forward, leaving the past behind and riding toward an uncertain future with a man she barely knew yet trusted implicitly. The first 2 days of their journey passed uneventfully. They followed a route that took them northwest, toward the town of Piney Ridge, where, according to Ethan's information, the horse thieves might strike next. They rode steadily but not harshly, making camp in the late afternoon each day to allow time for setting up before nightfall. Virginia found the rhythm of trail life surprisingly agreeable. There was a simplicity to it: ride, make camp, eat, sleep, break camp, ride again, that cleared her mind of everything but the immediate necessities. Ethan proved to be an excellent traveling companion, neither taciturn nor overly talkative, sharing observations about the landscape or stories from his travels when appropriate, but also comfortable with companionable silence. At night, they slept on opposite sides of the campfire, a physical distance that did nothing to diminish the growing awareness between them. Virginia often woke to find Ethan already up, tending the fire or preparing coffee, his gaze softer when it rested on her than at any other time. On the third day, as they approached a small settlement consisting of little more than a general store, a saloon, and a few scattered cabins, Ethan grew more vigilant. His eyes constantly scanned the horizon, and his hand rested more frequently on the gun at his hip. "What is it?" Virginia asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. "We're getting close to where I think they might be," Ethan replied, "and I don't like the look of this place. Too quiet." As they rode into the settlement hardly large enough to be called a town, Virginia understood what he meant. Though it was midday, there was little activity visible. The doors to the general store stood open, but no one moved inside. The saloon's windows were shuttered despite the pleasant weather. "Stay close," Ethan murmured as they dismounted in front of the store. "Something's not right here." They entered the store cautiously. A bell jingled above the door, the cheerful sound incongruous with the tense atmosphere. A middle-aged man appeared from a back room, his face drawn with worry. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, his eyes darting between them and the door. "Just passing through," Ethan said easily, though Virginia noted how he positioned himself to keep both the storekeeper and the entrance in his line of sight. "Thought we'd resupply. Mighty quiet town you have here." The storekeeper's laugh held no humor. "Wasn't so quiet 3 days ago. Had some trouble right in." Ethan's posture shifted subtly. "What kind of trouble?" "3 men, rough types. Started drinking at the saloon, then got into it with some local boys. One of our ranchers ended up dead, and they took off with a string of his best horses." The storekeeper shook his head. "Marshals gathered a posse, gone after them, but folks are still plenty shook up." Virginia felt her heart pound. "These men," she said, stepping forward despite Ethan's warning glance. "What did they look like?" The storekeeper eyed her curiously. One was big, bearded fellow. Another was skinny, with a scar down his face. Third was younger, maybe 20, dark-haired, had a silver concho belt that he was mighty proud of, kept drawing attention to it. Virginia's breath caught. The description matched what she had glimpsed of the men who attacked their homestead. "That's them," she whispered to Ethan, "the ones who killed Thomas." Ethan nodded almost imperceptibly, then turned back to the storekeeper. "Which way did they head? And how long ago did the marshal's posse follow?" "North, toward the Blackwater Valley. Posse left yesterday morning." The man's eyes narrowed. "You two got some business with those men?" "They killed my brother," Virginia said before Ethan could answer. "We've been tracking them for justice." The storekeeper's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, miss. Those men have left a trail of grief wherever they've gone." He hesitated, then added, "If you're going after them, you should know they're dangerous. The one with the scar, he shot Bob Jenkins in the back when Bob tried to stop them taking his horses. Didn't even hesitate." "We're aware of the risk," Ethan assured him. "How far is this Blackwater Valley?" "Day's ride, maybe less if you push it. Rough country, though. Easy place for men to hide if they know what they're doing. They purchased supplies quickly after that ammunition, jerky, coffee, and hardtack that would sustain them if fresh game proved scarce. As they prepared to leave, the storekeeper came around the counter. "Marshal Hollister's a good man," he said. "If anyone can bring those killers in, it's him. But he wouldn't turn away help, especially from folks with personal stakes in seeing justice done." Ethan nodded his thanks. Outside, as they mounted their horses, Virginia could hardly contain her nervous energy. "We're close, Ethan. So close to finding them." "We are," he agreed, his expression grave. "But Virginia, I need you to promise me something. When we find these men, and we will find them, you'll stay back. Let me and the marshal handle it." Virginia wanted to protest, to insist on her right to confront her brother's killers face to face, but she saw the concern in Ethan's eyes, the fear not for himself, but for her. "I promise," she said reluctantly. "But I want to see them brought to justice. I need to see it." "You will," Ethan assured her. "That I can promise you." They rode hard for the rest of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. The landscape grew more rugged as they approached the Blackwater Valley rocky outcroppings, breaking up the prairie, stands of pine and aspen providing more cover than the open plains they had traversed earlier. As dusk approached, they spotted smoke rising from a sheltered hollow about half a mile ahead. Ethan reined in his horse, signaling Virginia to do the same. "Could be the posse," he said, "or it could be our quarry. Either way, we approach carefully." He dismounted, tying his horse to a scrub pine. "Leave your mare here. We'll go the rest of the way on foot. Stay low and quiet." Virginia followed his lead, her heart thundering in her chest as they crept forward through the gathering shadows. They moved from cover to cover, Ethan's hand occasionally touching her arm to guide her path or warn her to stay still. As they drew closer to the camp, voices became audible, multiple men speaking, the occasional clink of metal against metal, the soft nickering of horses. Ethan motioned for Virginia to stay low behind a large boulder while he crept forward to get a better view. The minutes he was gone felt like hours. Virginia strained to hear the conversation from the camp, catching only fragments, something about splitting up, about heading for Montana Territory, about the horses they had taken. When Ethan returned, his expression was tense but satisfied. "It's the marshal's posse," he whispered. 6 men, including Hollister. "They've been tracking our men but lost the trail earlier today. They're camped for the night, planning to pick up the search at first light." "Should we approach them?" Virginia asked. Ethan nodded. "I'll go first, make sure they don't mistake us for threats. You stay here until I signal it's safe." Virginia waited anxiously as Ethan stood, raised his hands to show he was not a threat, and called out to the camp. There was a moment of tension, raised voices, the metallic sound of guns being readied, and then a more measured response. Ethan walked forward slowly, and Virginia lost sight of him as he entered the circle of firelight. Several minutes later, he reappeared at the edge of the camp and waved her forward. As Virginia approached, she saw a group of men gathered around a campfire trail, worn, armed, with the watchful eyes of those accustomed to danger. A tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest stepped forward. "Miss Nash, I'm Marshal Hollister. Mr. Lockhart here tells me you've had a personal tragedy at the hands of the men we're tracking. I'm mighty sorry for your loss." Virginia straightened her shoulders, determined to be seen as an equal, not an object of pity. "Thank you, Marshal. Have you had any luck tracking them?" Hollister gestured for her and Ethan to join the circle around the fire. "We were on their trail until this afternoon. They split up at the fork of the Blackwater River. Clever move. Makes them harder to track. We were just discussing how to proceed." One of the other men, older with a weathered face and a gray-streaked beard, spoke up. "I still say we split up too. 3 men follow each trail. We know where they're likely heading, either the Montoya trading post or up toward the Montana border." "And I still say that's too risky," another man countered. "These killers are staying together for a reason. They're stronger that way. If we split up, we could be outgunned if we find them." Ethan listened to the debate, then spoke. "What if we try something different? I've been tracking these men for weeks now. They're not just running, they're looking for opportunities, new targets, new horses to steal." "Go on," Hollister encouraged, interest sharpening his gaze. "The Montoya trading post, that's where folks from around here take horses to sell, isn't it?" The older man nodded. "Miguel Montoya's got connections with the army, buyers from back east. Always looking for good stock?" "Then that's where they're headed," Ethan said with certainty. "Not to sell the horses they've already stolen. Those are likely hidden somewhere safe, but to scope out their next targets. If we get to the trading post before them, set up a trap." Hollister's eyes lit with understanding. "We could catch them before they hurt anyone else. Lockhart, I like the way you think." As the men discussed the details of the plan, Virginia found herself studying them, the ease with which they talked of danger and justice, the casual way they checked their weapons even as they spoke. This was a world she had glimpsed only from the edges, the world Thomas had tried to shield her from. Yet here she was in the midst of it, not as a victim or a bystander, but as a participant. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Ethan must have sensed her thoughts, for he glanced her way, concern evident in the slight furrow of his brow. Virginia met his gaze steadily, trying to convey her determination. After a moment, he nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of her strength that warmed her more than the campfire. The plan was set by midnight. They would ride for the Montoya trading post at first light, taking a route that would get them there ahead of the likely arrival of the horse thieves. Marshal Hollister would position his men strategically, with Ethan's help, to catch the criminals when they arrived. As the posse members settled down to sleep, Ethan and Virginia set up their bedrolls slightly apart from the others. The night was cool, the stars brilliant in the clear sky above. "You should rest," Ethan said softly as they sat side by side, watching the dying embers of the fire. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Virginia nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily with her mind racing and her emotions in turmoil. "Ethan, when this is over, when they're caught, what then?" He glanced at her, his face shadowed in the dim light. "That depends on you, Virginia. You could return to your homestead, or sell it and start fresh somewhere else. The choice is yours." "And you?" she pressed. "What will you do?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the glowing coals. "I hadn't thought much beyond catching these men. Been chasing them so long, it's become a habit of its own." "You could?" Virginia hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "You could come back to the homestead, help me work it properly. As a partner, I mean, not just a temporary arrangement." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them had openly acknowledged. Ethan turned to look at her fully, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Virginia met his gaze, finding courage in the quiet intensity she saw there. "I think it is. You've shown me kindness when I needed it most, strength when mine failed. And I've come to care for you, Ethan, more than I expected to, more than perhaps I should, given how little time we've known each other." Ethan reached out slowly, his fingers finding hers in the darkness. The touch was gentle but electric, sending warmth coursing through her despite the night's chill. "Time isn't always the best measure of knowing someone," he said quietly. "Sometimes a week can tell you more than years. And what I know of you, Virginia Nash, is that you're brave and true, and stronger than you realize." His fingers tightened around hers. "I've tried not to care for you, tried to remember that I came to help as a friend, nothing more. But I've failed at that completely." Virginia's breath caught in her throat. "Is that such a failure?" "Not from where I'm sitting right now," Ethan admitted, a smile touching his lips. "But Virginia, we should talk about this after tomorrow, after these men are brought to justice, when your mind is clear and you're certain of what you want." Virginia understood his caution, respected it, even as part of her wished to press forward, to define whatever was growing between them. But he was right. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own emotions. Better to face those first, then turn to the future with clear eyes. After tomorrow, then, she agreed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand from his. But Ethan, I already know my own mind. That won't change. His smile deepened, warming his eyes. I'm mighty glad to hear it. They rose before dawn with the rest of the posse, breaking camp quickly and efficiently. The ride to the Montoya trading post took most of the morning, the terrain becoming increasingly mountainous as they traveled. By midday, they crested a ridge that offered a view of their destination, a substantial compound nestled in a small valley with several buildings, corrals full of horses, and a steady stream of activity as traders and customers came and went. Marshal Hollister outlined the final details of their plan. 4 of the posse would position themselves around the trading post, watching the approaches. Hollister himself would speak with Miguel Montoya, ensuring his cooperation. Ethan and another deputy would stay visible in the trading post, ready to identify the thieves if they appeared. What about me? Virginia asked, dismayed to find herself excluded from the arrangements. Hollister and Ethan exchanged a glance that told her they had already discussed this. Miss Nash, the marshal said gently, it would be best if you remained out of sight. These men might recognize you from your homestead. And if they do, they might run before we can capture them, Ethan added. Or worse, they might try to eliminate a witness. Virginia wanted to protest, but knew their reasoning was sound. Where do you suggest I stay, then? Miguel has a small room behind his office, Hollister explained. You'll be safe there, and close enough to know when we've apprehended the men. It wasn't what she wanted, but Virginia nodded her agreement. As they rode down toward the trading post, she found herself studying Ethan's profile, the determined set of his jaw, the alertness in his posture. This was the culmination of his weeks-long hunt, the justice he had pursued across hundreds of miles. She wondered if, once it was achieved, he would indeed be ready to consider a different kind of life, one that included her. The trading post was busier than Virginia had expected, with at least 20 people moving about the main yard traders, ranchers, a few families restocking supplies. Miguel Montoya, a barrel-chested man with a magnificent mustache and shrewd eyes, greeted Marshal Hollister with evident respect and immediately agreed to assist in their plan. These men you describe, they are bad for business, he declared. No honest trade can happen when thieves and killers roam free. My post is at your disposal, Marshal. Virginia was shown to a small but comfortable room behind Montoya's office, with a window that offered a view of the main yard. It was the perfect vantage point she could observe without being seen. I'll come for you when it's over, Ethan promised as he left her there. His hand lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary. Stay safe, Virginia. You too, she replied, fighting the urge to hold on to him, to ask him not to put himself at risk. But she knew that wasn't fair. This was who Ethan was, a man who pursued justice regardless of personal danger. The waiting was excruciating. Hours passed with no sign of the men they sought. Virginia watched as normal trading continued, horses changing hands, supplies being loaded into wagons, children running and playing between the buildings. Ethan and the deputy remained visible in the yard, pretending to inspect horses while actually surveilling everyone who entered the post. As afternoon waned toward evening, Virginia began to fear the thieves wouldn't come, that they had chosen another route, another target. She paced the small room, alternating between watching out the window and trying to distract herself with a book Montoya had provided. The sudden increase in activity in the yard drew her attention back to the window. 3 riders had entered the trading post, 2 from the main road and 1 from a side trail. Even from a distance, Virginia recognized them from the storekeeper's description. The big, bearded man, the thin one with the facial scar, and the younger one with the silver concho belt glinting in the late afternoon sun. Her heart raced as she watched Ethan casually position himself near the trading post's main building, his posture relaxed but his eyes tracking the newcomers. Marshal Hollister emerged from Montoya's office, walking unhurriedly toward the water trough where the three men had stopped to water their horses. Virginia held her breath, watching the scene unfold with agonizing slowness. The marshal approached the men, his manner friendly but watchful. Words were exchanged, too distant for Virginia to hear, and for a moment it seemed the plan might work perfectly, the men taken by surprise and captured without incident. Then everything happened at once. The scarred man must have recognized Hollister as Law, for he suddenly drew his gun. Ethan shouted a warning. People scattered, seeking cover. Gunshots rang out, the sound sharp and terrifying in the enclosed yard. Virginia pressed herself against the window, desperate to see what was happening through the chaos. She spotted Ethan ducking behind a water barrel, returning fire. The youngest thief fell, clutching his shoulder. The bearded man made a break for his horse, only to be cut off by two of the posse members who had converged from their watchpoints. The scarred man, clearly the leader, backed toward the side trail, firing as he went. He was heading straight for the building where Virginia watched, seeking escape through the less guarded route. Without thinking, Virginia grabbed the small derringer she had carried since leaving the homestead and moved to the door. If the killer passed by, she might have the only clear shot at him. Thomas deserved that much from her, the courage to face his murderer. She cracked the door open just as the scarred man ran past, his face contorted with desperation and rage. Virginia stepped out, raised the derringer, and called out, "Stop!" The man whirled, his gun coming up automatically. Recognition flashed in his eyes. He knew her, remembered her from the homestead. His lip curled in a sneer, finger tightening on the trigger. Two shots rang out simultaneously. Virginia felt a burning pain across her upper arm. The scarred man jerked backward, a look of surprise replacing the sneer, as a crimson stain blossomed on his chest. He crumpled to the ground as Ethan appeared, his smoking gun still trained on the fallen man. "Virginia!" Ethan's voice was ragged with fear as he rushed to her side. "Are you hit?" "Just a graze," she managed, though the pain was intensifying as shock wore off. "Did you... Is he..." "He's done," Ethan confirmed grimly. "They all are, one dead, two captured." His free arm went around her waist, supporting her as her knees suddenly felt weak. "Damn it, Virginia, I told you to stay hidden." "I couldn't," she said simply. "He killed Thomas. I needed to face him." Ethan's expression shifted from anger to understanding, though the fear remained in his eyes. "You could have been killed if my shot had been a fraction slower." But it wasn't. Virginia looked up at him, seeing the genuine terror in his face, not for himself, but for her. "You were there, just as you've been since the day you found me at Thomas's grave." Marshal Hollister approached, holstering his weapon. His sharp eyes took in Virginia's bloody sleeve, Ethan's protective stance, and the dead man on the ground. "Everyone accounted for?" he asked Ethan, who nodded. "Good. Miss Nash, let's get that arm looked at. Then we'll need statements from both of you." The next hours passed in a blur. Virginia's wound was cleaned and bandaged by a trader's wife with medical experience. Statements were given, details recorded. The surviving thieves were secured in a makeshift jail cell at the trading post, to be transported to the territorial court the next day. By the time all the formalities were completed, night had fallen. Miguel Montoya generously offered rooms to the entire posse, including Virginia and Ethan. Too exhausted for further conversation, they accepted gratefully, retiring to separate but adjacent rooms. Virginia sat on the edge of her bed, her bandaged arm aching dully, her mind replaying the day's events. Thomas's killers had been brought to justice, one dead, two facing the hangman's noose. It should have felt like a triumphant conclusion, yet she found herself oddly hollow, uncertain. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. She rose and opened it to find Ethan standing there, his expression a complex mix of emotions. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. "Just to talk." Virginia nodded, stepping back to allow him entry. He closed the door behind him, but remained standing near it, as if uncertain of his welcome. "How's your arm?" he asked. "Sore, but the bleeding stopped. It truly is just a graze." "You were lucky." Ethan's voice was tight with remembered fear. "When I saw him raise his gun at you, I thought I might lose you before I ever really had you." The raw honesty in his words took Virginia's breath away. "Ethan." "No, let me finish." He took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "When I found you at your brother's grave, I offered to be the brother he'd want you to have. I meant it then meant to help you, protect you, give you time to heal. But somewhere along the way, my feelings changed." Virginia's heart thundered in her chest. "Mine too," she whispered. Ethan took another step closer. Close enough now that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, smell the familiar scent of leather and pine that clung to him. "I don't want to be your brother, Virginia. I want to be your partner, your friend, your—" He swallowed hard. "Your husband, if you'll have me. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but today showed me that life's too short and too precious to waste time when you're certain of your heart." Virginia felt tears welling in her eyes, not of grief this time, but of a joy so intense it was almost painful. "You're certain, then? About me?" "More certain than I've been of anything in my life," Ethan said simply. "I love you, Virginia Nash. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you so fierce in your grief, so determined to honor your brother even as your heart was breaking." Virginia closed the remaining distance between them, her good arm reaching up to touch his face. "I love you too, Ethan Lockhart. And yes, it's fast. And yes, some might call it foolish. But I don't care. Life is uncertain today proved that beyond any doubt. I want to spend whatever time I have with you." Ethan's arms went around her carefully, mindful of her injury. "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, a smile beginning to lighten his serious expression. "Yes," Virginia confirmed, her own smile blooming. "Yes to being your wife, your partner, your friend. Yes to building a life together, whether at my homestead or somewhere new entirely." Ethan's kiss was gentle at first, as if he feared she might break. Then, deepening as she responded with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, the joy between them was palpable, a living thing that filled the small room. "Tomorrow," Ethan said, resting his forehead against hers, "we'll head back to your homestead. Our homestead now, if you still want to keep it." "I do," Virginia decided. "It was Thomas's dream, and I'd like to see it fulfilled. But with you there, it will be our dream too, something new built on the foundation of what came before." The journey back to the homestead took 3 days. Days filled with planning and dreaming and getting to know each other better with the pressure of pursuit finally lifted. They were married in the small church in Willow Creek, with Marshall Hollister and a few of the posse members as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but to Virginia it was perfect, a beginning that honored the past without being bound by it. Spring turned to summer, and the homestead flourished under their joint care. Ethan's skills complemented Virginia's, his strength matching her determination. Together they expanded the garden, added to the herd of cattle, and began construction on the larger house Thomas had dreamed of building. On warm evenings they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. Sometimes they spoke of the future children they hoped to have, dreams they shared. Sometimes they remembered those they had lost, Thomas, Ethan's brother Robert, their parents. And sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, each grateful for the unexpected path that had brought them together. One such evening, as autumn painted the distant trees in shades of amber and russet, Virginia leaned against Ethan's shoulder, his arm warm and secure around her waist. "Do you ever think about how strange it is," she mused, "that the worst day of my life led to meeting you?" Ethan's fingers traced gentle patterns on her arm, the one that bore a small scar from that fateful day at the trading post. "I've thought about it often, how grief can open doors we never knew existed." Virginia nodded, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. "Thomas would have liked you," she said softly. "He always wanted me to find someone strong and kind, someone who would see me as I am, not as some fragile creature to be sheltered." I wish I could have known him, Ethan replied. But in a way, I feel I do through you, through this place he built, through the stories you've shared. Virginia smiled, turning in his embrace to face him. You know what he would say if he could see us now? Took you long enough, Jenny. Ethan laughed, the sound warm and rich in the gathering darkness. Well, he'd be right about that, though I maintain that 3 days from meeting to proposing is rather quick by most standards. When you know, Virginia said simply, echoing words Ethan had spoken on their wedding day. She raised a hand to his cheek, still marveling at the right she had to touch him so intimately, to call this good man her husband. I'm grateful every day that you found me at my lowest moment and chose to stay. I'm the grateful one, Ethan murmured, drawing her closer. You gave me a home, Virginia, not just this place, but here. He placed her hand over his heart. For a drifter, that's the most precious gift imaginable. As the stars multiplied overhead, they remained on the porch, talking softly of the day's work and tomorrow's plans. The homestead around them was quiet, but for the occasional lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the prairie grass, a peace hard-won but all the more valuable for it. And if sometimes, in the deepest part of night, Virginia woke reaching for a brother who was no longer there, she found instead a husband whose love had healed her broken heart in ways she had never thought possible. Not replacing what was lost, but building something new and beautiful from the ruins of grief. In the spring of their second year together, as new life burst forth across the prairie, Virginia gave birth to a son they named Thomas, in honor of the brother whose absence had brought them together. Looking down at the infant in her arms, his tiny hand wrapped around his father's finger, Virginia felt the circle of life complete itself, loss and love, grief and joy, all woven together into the rich tapestry of their shared existence. He would be so proud, Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at his son. Of you, of this place, of everything you've built. Of everything we've built, Virginia corrected gently. Together. As the years passed, the homestead grew into a prosperous ranch. 2 more children joined their family, a daughter, Catherine, with Virginia's dark hair and Ethan's blue eyes, and another son, Robert, named for Ethan's fallen brother. The house Thomas had dreamed of became a reality, a spacious home filled with laughter and love, its doors always open to travelers and neighbors alike. Ethan occasionally took on tracking work for the territorial authorities, his reputation for fairness and skill making him sought after. But he never stayed away long, always returning to Virginia and their children with the eagerness of a man who knew where his true treasures lay. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Ethan took Virginia to the small ridge where Thomas's grave stood. The crude wooden cross had long since been replaced by a proper headstone, the area around it carefully tended and planted with wildflowers. They stood together, hands clasped in silent remembrance. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly. Staying here, building our life in a place with such painful memories? Virginia considered the question seriously, as she did all things. No, she said finally. The pain is part of our story, just as the joy is. I wouldn't change it even if I could. Every part of our path led us to here and now. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. I came west looking for something I couldn't name. Found purpose in tracking men like those who killed Thomas. But I never found peace until I found you. Virginia leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence as she had countless times over the years. When you found me crying over my lost brother and said you'd be the brother he'd want me to have, I thought you were just being kind. I never imagined you'd become so much more the love of my life, the father of my children, the partner in all my dreams. Life has a way of surprising us, Ethan murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Sometimes for the better. As they walked back toward their home, where their children waited and the future stretched before them, bright with promise, Virginia sent a silent thank you to her brother. For his love, for his dreams, and for somehow, she was certain, guiding Ethan Lockhart to her on that stormy afternoon when all hope seemed lost. The pain of his loss would never completely fade, but it had been transformed from a wound that threatened to destroy her to a tender spot that reminded her of the preciousness of life and love. And in that transformation lay the truest memorial to Thomas Nash, not just in the prosperous ranch that bore his name, or in the nephew who carried it forward, but in the happiness his sister had found with the cowboy who had promised to be the brother Thomas would want her to have, and had become so much more.